Okay, so I hope everyone can hear me. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It's great. I mean, we have almost 50 people here now in this seminar, and not only academics, but also a lot of aviation professionals. So this is fantastic, and I hope you will all think at the end of this seminar that it was worthwhile joining. This is the start of a 4-seminar series, and the next seminar will be on the day after tomorrow, 29th of April, by Nicole Adler on air traffic controls. Then we have another seminar on May 5th by Joost van Ommeren. Nicole is from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Joost van Ommeren is from the Free University of Amsterdam, and he will be talking about frequent flyer programs. And then we have the fourth presentation by Jan Bruckner from the University of California in Irvine on airline scheduling. All the sessions will be recorded and then published on our LMS, so on our departmental YouTube channel, so that, if for any reason you may want to have another look at the presentation, you're welcome to check the video, or you can just forward it and share the information with others. I would like to ask you to, in this seminar, to basically, interact with me. So whenever you're having a question, please feel free to use the checkbox, for instance, or what you can also do is you can unmute the mic. Please leave it muted, and also switch off the video if you're just listening. But if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to just unmute the mic and switch on your video and ask your question, and then I can respond to this right away. Another issue is that maybe during the presentation, it would be good in general not to ask questions for clarification. And then what I'm trying to make sure is that we will have enough time at the end for question and answer. So I'm trying to be short, although it's not always easy because during the presentation is always the time is passing by so quickly. But let me just move on and directly go to share the presentation slides with you. All right, so the topic is optimal use it or lose it rules for airport slot management. And okay, so let me give you first some background information. We had a couple of days ago, we had a panel discussion on the effect of the coronavirus outbreak on the aviation industry. And we were so lucky to have Brian Pierce, who is the chief economist of IATA, presenting to us the numbers. And they were quite, I would say, frightening. And I just show you one of his slides. And this slide shows that overall the air traffic, the global air traffic, is down by almost 80%. So this is, a huge number, this is unbelievable. But on the other hand, we know that the aviation industry is quite resilient. So we hope that we will soon get over this and that things will get better soon. On the other hand, what we also saw, there were some headlines in the newspapers. And I just did some Google search and for empty airplanes. And then you got those results. Airlines flying empty planes to keep slots. Ghost flights. Why our skies are full of empty planes, from CNN. And then coronavirus. airlines won't need to keep flying almost empty planes and so on and so forth, ghost planes and so on and so forth. And so there were airlines were actually flying empty planes just because of slots. And so I haven't mentioned, I will explain to you what slots mean very soon, but we already see that slots are something apparently very valuable, because airlines, just to have those slots, they were willing to fly empty planes. And so this is an indication of how valuable these slots are for airlines. But we also have some more specific numbers. So if we look at London Heathrow, for instance, then we see that this is an article from the March 6th, just 3 weeks ago. And then Air New Zealand has sold slots for a pair of slots for $27 million US. So again, this shows how that slots is something that is very valuable. But that's not the most expensive pair of slots that you could buy. There was, for instance, in 2016, there was one transaction in which one pair of slots at a very convenient time at London Heathrow was sold for $75 million US. So this is a lot of money. So if we are talking about slots, and in particular how to allocate slots to airlines, then you see that this is a very crucial issue. And I believe maybe this is also because we have so many aviation professionals in the audience today. So so what are slots? Apparently they're important. So what are they? And if you want to understand what are slots, it's actually good to go back to IATA, because IATA is publishing the so-called Worldwide Slot Guidelines. And this is I believe, the most recent version, the cover page of the most recent version, published in August 2019. And let's have a look on what they say what slots are. Here, and this is the red box at the top. This is the definition of a slot. So an airport slot or slot is a permission given by a coordinator for a planned operation to use a full range of airport infrastructure necessary to arrive or depart at a level 3 airport on a specific date and time. Basically, it's the permission to use an airport as a specific date and time. And so if an airline wants to fly to a slot coordinated airport, it needs a permission to do so. And the number of permissions are limited. And so we know that there is demand and supply. So if the number of these permissions are small relative to the demand, then this, of course, increases the prices. And this is why the airport slots can be sold for a very high amount of money. But why is it that airlines that already had the permission were flying near empty planes, right? In order to sort of keep the slots. And this is now in the paragraph 1.72F, okay? There it is. There is the answer. And the answer is an airline is entitled to retain a series of slots for the next equivalent season. And season is, as far as I know, is around half a year. If they were operated at least 80% of the time during the period for which they were allocated. Now, if these airlines would, if there is because of the coronavirus, country lockdowns, demand went down, airlines couldn't fill their aircraft, even if they maybe sold the tickets for the ticket, reduced the ticket prices very substantially. Well, but they were still flying. Why? In order to make sure that they keep the 80% of their because they need to operate the slots in order to get the permission also in the next period. And that's what we call use it or lose it. The 80%, that's basically the number that I will be discussing in this seminar talk. It's basically about, the whole talk is basically about, is 80% the right number? Or perhaps not? Or under what conditions may it be better to have maybe a 90% or perhaps only 70% of the requirement? Okay. There is something else. Of course, it's all important, but for the present study, some facts are a little more important than others. So have a look at the paragraph 8.333, the other underlined sentence at the bottom of the slide. And then it says 50% of the slots contained in the pool at initial slot allocation must be allocated to new entrant requests. Okay, so this means that if you have some, you have a pool, for instance, if an airport expands capacity because maybe air traffic control, the air traffic control system has been optimized so that you can have a little more slot capacity, or that you have, I don't know, you do some other, maybe you have some infrastructure improvement so you can have a couple of more slots. Then these slots go into a pool, and then these regulations ensure that or imply that at least 50% should go to new entrants. Now, what is a new entrant airline? A new entrant airline is not necessarily an airline that's a new airline. It can be a long-established airline, but it is an airline that at that specific airport, it has a relatively small market share. Okay, that's usually the way new entrants at airports are defined, according to my knowledge. So what we see is that, of course, if you see, okay, if you had the slots in the past and you operate them 80% of the time during a period, then you can also have them in the future. So in a sense, airlines that didn't operate in the past, of course, they cannot take advantage of this so-called historic precedence. And this, of course, means that new entrants, in that sense, that airlines haven't been there in the past, have a disadvantage in getting slots in the future. So these priority rules that attach priority to new entrants sort of is a way of compensating for this disadvantage. Okay, and these are basically, this is sort of the context in which I studied the issue of airport slot allocation rule, and in particular the use it or lose it share. Okay, let's go to the next slide. You may wonder, yeah, okay, good. So airport slots, but how many airports, airport slots, yeah, they can be expensive. But if there are only few slot constrained airports in the world, then maybe it's not worthwhile really discussing. So it would be important to also see how many airports are sort of slot constrained. And if you see here, in the summer 2019, there's also information from IATA. In summer 2019, there were 204 slot coordinated airports worldwide. Now you may say, 204, is this a big number or not? So I just checked it, actually, the number of commercial airports globally. And I just looked at some source, and it's the number that I got is almost 18,000. So let's take this number as given, 18,000. Then 200 or 204 seems like a small number. Well, but the issue is that there are a lot of airports around, and many of these airports are pretty small with only a few passengers, and then they sort of count a little less. So if you take into account the passenger numbers as well, then these 204 slot coordinated airports cover around 43% of the global departing passengers. So almost half percent, almost 50%. So that's quite substantial. Sometimes I would say even for people, actually I will talk about myself. I think, oh, how can for me it's even hard to imagine that maybe big airports could just could operate without such a slot system. So without slot coordination, where you have someone when an airline wants to schedule a certain flight to that airport, that they don't need a permission for that. But if you look at this again globally, then in particular at the US, then in the US only very few slot coordinated airports. If you look at the biggest airport in the world in terms of passengers, still the biggest airport in the world in terms of passenger numbers, to my knowledge again, 110,000 passengers in Atlanta, the biggest airport in the world in terms of passenger numbers. No slot controls. Now, airlines want to go there, they just go there. They don't need a permission, they just fly there. And it's, apparently the system is sort of working. So it's not that you desperately need slots. Some airports in the New York area, they also slot constrained, and then they took away the slots, and that actually led to some trouble. Again, so the issue here is really the relation demand to capacity. So if there's a lot of demand and capacity is scarce, then slots actually can help coordinate the air traffic and avoid excessive congestion and delays. So that's basically the story. So we're talking about slots. Slots are relevant on the global scale. They are really relevant for airline businesses, and they are and how can you see that they are very valuable? Because they're also expensive. So if airline can buy them, then they're very expensive. Let's have another look at IATA. So you see that the worldwide slot guidelines are largely influenced by the IATA. And the IATA is the International Air Transport Association, and it's a airline association. Now you may wonder who does, so you understand that IATA represents airlines. But then what kind of airlines? Who are the airlines they represent? Okay. And then if there's this website from the airlines, IATA.org, and then you can search for the numbers. And then, for instance, I just searched for instance, Ryanair, and then I got this result. So no airline member found. So I assume that Ryanair is not a member of IATA. You could also look for instance, EasyJet. Okay, EasyJet also the same result, or Southwest Airlines, and not a member. Again, to my knowledge, not a member of IATA. So and I also looked for AirAsia, for instance, and I also didn't find a match. So so IATA is not all airlines are a member of IATA, and the airlines that I've just listed, Ryanair, EasyJet, Southwest, there are some very specific type of airlines. First of all, they are big airlines. Okay, it's not that just like some small airlines are not members of IATA. Ryanair is the maybe the biggest airline in Europe right now. As EasyJet, definitely a big airline. Southwest, definitely a big airline in the US. So these are all big airlines, and they are not members of IATA. And what they also share is they are low-cost carriers. And we know that there is some sort of intense competition between low-cost carriers and the more established full-service carriers. So that is also something that I personally think is something that I would like to highlight, is that the rules are sort of influenced by some association that is, represents many airlines, but is not fully representative for the airlines, for all airlines. Or really like the system that I have just described, just roughly described, and just picked certain elements that I thought were the ones that I'm interested in, has been long criticized. Actually, I just remember that I started researching air transport topics because as a student I was involved in a consultancy project, and on airport slot allocation rules for an airport construction company. And then the airport construction company at the time were thinking, we are not very happy with these IATA rules, in particular because we feel that they may encourage airlines to, or basically they may not avoid to an extent that we would like to have to, the appearance of no-show. So the airlines come but don't come, are scheduled for arrival or departure, but then don't make use of their permission. And then, of course, for the airport, that's not a good story. So they were thinking, okay, maybe there's something that we can do. And that was definitely more than 20 years ago. And there is the reason why I'm mentioning this is a long discussion. There is a long discussion about these airport slot rules, and there are a lot of studies which I have basically listed at the end of the presentation in the references. And so this is a hot topic for a long time. And a lot of people, you can see also on the left-hand side, some people say, oh, the rules on allocating takeoff and landing slots favor incumbents, right? I already explained that, because, how can you benefit from using, you get them if you use them in the past, but if you haven't existed in the past, of course, you couldn't have used them in the past, and then you won't get them in the future, right? So there is these kind of elements. So a lot of people criticize them, but also there is, I would like to highlight, would like to contribute to a more balanced discussion by also highlighting that they can have some positive effects. For instance, my PhD student and we have been just publishing a study on airport congestion management. And we capture that slots are basically not commercialized in a way that airports can sort of earn from selling slots to let's say airlines. And this fact is actually something that can have some positive effects on airport congestion management, because this may avoid this avoids the airport's incentive maybe to reduce the number of slots in order to earn a little bit more profits or revenue from selling the slots. So this is certainly something that these rules have different implications, and some of them may be problematic and some of them may not be as problematic or even have some positive effects. So I would be in favor of a more what I'm trying to provide is a more balanced discussion of the slot rules. I would like to, if you don't mind, I personally love that this polling function. Now, let me ask you the following question. Are you in favor of maintaining, slot IATA slot rules as they are? Okay, so that's a question, and that's anonymous. So I don't know how you respond. And if you feel that you don't want to respond, you just don't respond. But if you have an opinion, you want to express your opinion in an anonymous way, then just go ahead. So this is the issue. So are you in favor of maintaining IATA slot rules as they are? Yes or no? It's just, I think this is really one of the features of these online tools, that you can do these kind of pollings very easily, and you can get some understanding of who you're talking to. That's very interesting. I wait a little longer because the responses are still coming in. Still coming in. Okay, now it's sort of a little bit slowing down. I will count down from 10 to 0. So there is a comment. Let me see. I cannot see it actually. Oh, there was somewhere there was a comment, but now it has disappeared somehow. Okay, so let me show you the result. It's interesting. You see, actually, the audience is quite split up in a way. A slight majority of those who have responded are in favor of just maintaining the rules as they are, and the others maybe not so much. So you see, there is. I think what this shows to me is that there is some room for discussion and for analysis as well, because this is basically what we academics try to do. We're trying to enrich the discussion by by analyzing things in a hopefully neutral and perhaps objective way, and so that we can contribute to this discussion. So that's very interesting. 24 and 20. 24 in favor of the rules as they are, and 20 more critical. Thank you. Okay, so let me briefly describe on what I try to achieve in this study. It's not, and I know that a lot of economists will not necessarily like my approach. Okay, I'm aware of that, because apparently the rules are not. We like to always have like prices, market clearing prices, and then sort of just market rules like slot trading and congestion pricing and all these kind of things. And if you feel that there are some rules that may not be achieving what we call like the first best result, so the result that optimizes the outcome of the allocation of these slots to airlines for the economy as a whole, consisting of incumbents, new entrants, but also passengers, but also other stakeholders, then maybe we feel not very happy. But what I'm doing in this study is I just want to take the system as, keep the ideas of the system as they are, and just think a little bit about whether there is a way of fine-tuning the system. And one of the issues really is that the 80% that I have told you, or that are written in the slot guidelines, the 80%, they are applied at all the slot coordinated airports. So that was a question that I think is worthwhile discussing. I feel a slightly more complicated system where there are use it or lose it shares, the 80%, but maybe at some airports they are lower, or at some airports they are higher, and then we want to understand under which conditions you may want to have them higher or lower. And then another issue is, do we feel that the 80% have been determined under conditions that are, by institutions that sort of have the right incentives. That's also an issue, right? So these are two questions I would like to answer. So what are the incentives of an institution that may be more representative for incumbent airlines rather than like new entrant airlines? And then on top of this, what is under what conditions, under what market environments would you like be a little bit tougher on airlines by saying, okay, no, 80% a little bit too low, 85% would be better, or 90%. Or you should be a little bit more relaxed, saying, oh, 80%, we don't want to put the burden on you. If you fly it 60%, still fine. You still can benefit from historic precedents. Okay? So that's basically the situation. And then this is, for instance, Hong Kong and London are interesting cases for me. Why? Because, of course, the situation right now is not very representative, but the idea is that under usual conditions, Hong Kong International Airport is fully utilized. So there are no free slots really available for airlines, or not to a significant amount. And similar situation in Hong Kong. But there is the plan to add a third runway, right? If I remember correctly, Hong Kong 2024, and in London maybe 29 or something like that. So there is a third runway coming, and then of course the situation changes, right? So how do you deal with it? What happens until you open the runway, the third runway, and what should happen after opening the third runway? So these are questions that I think are worthwhile asking. And the paper is available, and it's you can, so here on the website you can just, if you're interested in more details than the ones that I give you in this presentation, please have a look at this website, and then you can download it, and you can see I circle it in red. It currently has the incredible rank of 406,296. So very low. So you can help me bring it a little bit up, okay? But hopefully, of course, I hope that after this presentation you have the feeling that it's worthwhile having a look at the paper. And if you have some comments that you would like to you're welcome to, first of all, give me some comments here in the chat box, but then also in the you can just speak up, or you can just send me an email or something. All right, so let's move on with this. So that's sort of the background, and then these are supposed to be checks, okay? The signs are not very clear. So the features of the present studies are: incumbent, do I have an incumbent? Check. Do I have a new entrant? Check. Do I cover such a thing as historic precedents? Check. The use it or lose it rules, also part of it, and also priority rules. So these are the features that are included in this study. And let me give you a sneak preview. What I feel is that until the third runway will be open, and of course under normal conditions, not what we experience right now, but once we are sort of recovered and Hong Kong International Airport is fully utilized again, hopefully soon, then I do believe that maybe one should think of maybe having a little bit higher use it or lose it share than what we have right now. And afterwards, once the third runway is open, then maybe reducing it. And similar situation also in London. This would be my feeling, that this could improve the overall aviation market, because it could help to have a more healthy sort of, or it could improve the services, the airline services available to passengers. And these were just, and this is the more specific sneak preview. So what sort of my analysis shows is that incumbents, when they choose when they express or influence the the determination of the use it or lose it shares, in this situation, they have incentives to be a little bit more relaxed than what an institution would choose that does not only care about incumbents or airlines, but also, for instance, about passengers. It matters. So incentives matter. Of course, that's something that economists always say, and this study sort of provides some support for this, for the fact that the incentives of an institution that may be representative primarily for incumbent airlines maybe doesn't have the right incentive, and that passenger protection may require that we are a little bit tougher, sort of, in terms of use it or lose it shares, so that we increase the use it or lose it shares. If we would move from an airline association that would be representative really for all airlines, for instance, we could have IATA and the low-cost carriers could also have a say in the determination of the use it or lose it shares. That would be better, but still not resolve the issue. So, some institutions would be needed to protect also passenger interests. Just leaving it to the airlines alone, whether for a representative, fully representative, or only partly representative institution, wouldn't do the job. And who comes to my mind for passenger protection? Well, here it is now the government, but basically the more important thing is who is doing the job. I don't care really, but what I try to highlight is that there is someone required to also represent the interest of the passengers in this whole process. And the airlines all by themselves, of course, airlines also care about passengers, it's not about that, but in a way, not sufficiently, okay? So there is this other point, periods of, and then what I distinguish is about periods with demand growth and constant airport capacity and intense rivalry. So if we look at a situation that is sort of representative for Hong Kong under normal conditions, is that you have periods of demand growth because we're in the Asia-Pacific region. There's used to be a lot of growth, right? And we will have a lot of growth, but the capacity is fixed until 2024. So in this situation, you have faced the growth and you have the given capacity. And then also if you have some intense rivalry between, let's say, established airlines and maybe new entrant airlines that could be low-cost airlines. These are the scenarios that, based on my analysis, I would predict are the most difficult, so to say, where you would have this, the strongest, the most intense discussions about maybe the sort of those who represent the airlines and those who also represent the passengers. So these will be the most difficult sort of times when it comes to the determination of the use it or lose it shares. And what's also interesting is that if you have a given demand and you just look at the situation that you increase the number of, that you increase the capacity for a given demand, then it's essentially basically the new entrants that benefit from this the most. So you can have a more balanced situation if you are where the incumbent or the incumbent airlines as well as the new entrants benefit is if you expand in a expand capacity in a situation with demand growth, then essentially that's a situation where new entrants as well as the established airlines can benefit from this situation quite a bit. Okay, so there's a question from Volodymyr. Let me see whether I can answer this quickly. Could the share of flights required to keep the slot be a function of the airport capacity utilization? More generally, do the models deal with slot hoarding? So here, could the share of flights required to keep the slots to be a function of the airport capacity utilization? Maybe, Volodymyr, why don't we keep this for the Q&A session, and then I ask you to unmute the mic and you just ask your question, okay? So that we can, then we can discuss it, okay? All right, so that's a sneak preview. So now I have a few more minutes for but that's sort of these are the main messages. Now I show you this. This is the public transport map in Hong Kong. Of course, all people that have ever traveled to Hong Kong, or every Hong Konger, they know this map. Now you wonder, why do I show you this kind of map? First, I would say everyone agrees with me. You have these kind of maps in all cities, right, where we have a public transport system. So everywhere, they always look sort of very similar. And I would say I've no doubt that everyone would agree with me that this map is extremely useful. Because if you want to go from one place to the other, you use the map, and it provides you really quite good guidance on where you should go from, which stations to take, where you have to change your trains maybe, and so on and so forth. But look at this. This is a very abstract version of the world, right? You have only this this is a very abstract way of, describing Hong Kong. There are no roads. You don't see any the people in the streets. You don't see any shops. You don't see buildings, right? Of course, you have the Disney resort, then you have this Mickey Mouse figure there. But everyone would agree it's a very abstract way of describing the world, or Hong Kong in this case. But the very fact that it's so abstract is actually why it becomes useful, because then we can easily grasp where to enter, where to change, and so on and so forth. We get the information that we need in a very concise and very convenient way. And why is it so convenient? Because we just leave everything that we don't need. We strip it away, we take it away, and just stick to those parts that we need. And this is actually what economists do. There is this very interesting presentation by Danny Roderick that you can also see on YouTube, where he explains what economists do. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because if you see now how I model airport markets, then you will think, oh my goodness, he doesn't consider this, he doesn't consider that, and so on and so forth. But I sort of, in anticipation of this, I just show you this map. And I believe that what I tried to do is I just took away all these things that are somehow important, but not necessarily for the discussion of the use it or lose it shares that I intend to provide. Okay, so you shouldn't be too shocked. Okay, so this is I feel that the way I'm abstracting away from things and show you a simplified version of the world in terms of airports and incumbent and new entrant airlines is actually a service to you rather than limitation sort of the approach. Okay, so here are the model details. So for those, this is basically it's a very simple model. So we have two time periods. In the first period, we only have an incumbent, and in the second period, the incumbent airline will be operating together with a new entrant airline. And QI1 is I is standing for incumbent in period 1. QI2 is the number of passengers. And here, number of passengers and number of flights are basically the same. And QI2 is the number of the incumbents, passengers or flights in the second period. And QN is the number of flights or passengers of the new entrant, also in the second period. And then here we have the capacity. And the capacity is given by a certain value K. Okay. And then we have the use it or lose it share. So if we look at the IATA guidelines, then alpha would be 0.8. And then we have some cost of the incumbent only in the first period. Okay, so I only have this cost component, which is here called G. And so you could think of what would the incumbent do if there would be no slot rules, if there would only be the first period, for instance, there would be no competition with the new entrant in the second period, and there would be no slot rules in this situation. What would this airline, the incumbent, do? They would just choose a certain network that would maximize the profit of the incumbent airline, right? But now we introduce those rules. And then we say, oh, if you want to have the this and that number of slots in the next period, then you have to use these rules at least alpha% of the time. That's basically the idea. And then the airline will be, adjusting. That's the idea, right? They will in this framework, the idea they will sort of adjust the network in order to ensure that it meets these restrictions, that the use it or lose it share can be achieved. And so these adjustments, they lead to some deviation from the sort of standalone optimal airline schedule. And these deviations from the somehow optimal schedule will lead to some cost, right? It's something that there's some cost associated with this. And these are some real costs. So, and these costs are captured by this function, G. And of course, they only appear in the first period, because in the second period, then there is no third period, right? So these adjustments only happen in the first period. And these are the only costs we consider, because this is the costs that are most relevant to us. And all the others, of course, they're all there and they exist, but we don't care for them right now. It's like when we are looking at the MTR map, we don't put roads, we don't put buildings, and so on and so forth. And then we get something like this. So the scheduling guidelines. So we have here the second period traffic is the first period traffic divided by the use it or lose it share. So for instance, if you have a certain number of flights and the use it or lose it share is 50%, then you can get twice as many slots in the future. So this basically captures that the use it or lose it share goes down. This translates into a higher number of permissions in the next period. That's something that you can get from this. And then here there's this, and now we are moving in the second period supply of the new entrant. And here is a radical sort of assumption that captures the priority rule. So priority rules that 50% of the available slots should be allocated to new entrants. And here I assume that all the available slots are given to the new entrants. And what I sort of show in the appendix of the paper, that whether it's 50% or 60%, it doesn't really matter. So this is why I said, okay, let's just make it 100%. All the slots are given to the new entrant. Is this fully realistic? No. Does it matter for this analysis? No. Okay. And so this is basically a work of the functioning of the world of this. And then I do some analysis based on general functional forms. So demands could be concave, convex, or just linear, or like strictly concave, strictly convex, or just linear. I also use some linear functional forms to do, for instance, numerical simulations. And some of the results can be shown under pretty general conditions, and some results are based on numerical simulations, but also these results are pretty robust. So let me show you how the pictures look like. Okay, so this is how the numerical simulations look like. They show, for instance, this. So on the horizontal axis, what do you have? You have the use it or lose it share, okay? And then you have these vertical lines. And the vertical lines, what they show is that the solid vertical lines are those lines that are optimal from the viewpoint of someone that does not only care about airlines, but also about not only care about airline profit, but also about passengers and what we call consumer surplus. Then you have they come up with these solid lines, and the dashed lines are the ones that would be preferred by the incumbent. And this is a pretty general result, that the solid lines are sort of higher, represent higher use it or lose it shares than the dashed lines. So that's something that is true for this numerical example here, but it's more generally true also under more general functional forms. And then what you can see here is you see, let's forget the dashed lines for a moment, the vertical lines for a moment, and then you look at these sort of more horizontal dashed and sorted lines. And then look at the bottom. Then you see the QN. So here you can see, depending on the use it or lose it share, the number of passengers served by the new entrant in the second period. And then you can see that the QN, there are two lines, right? One is solid and the other is dashed. And the dashed line is lower than the solid line, right? So you have this, I don't know, I try to. So this is the dashed line and this is the solid line. And then this sort of goes like this, it goes downwards, okay? These are the ones. So, and this is what happens if you assume that the rivalry between the new entrant and the incumbent is tougher, okay? Then we are moving to the dash lines. Then what the incumbent would want to do is to use the use it or lose it share in order to reduce the new entrants, the use it or lose it policy in order to reduce the number of passengers and flights in the second period. So this is now a situation where we compare low and high capacity. So the solid lines are the ones that we had before, and the dashed lines, so the horizontal lines, are the ones that would exist in the case of capacity expansion in the second period, if there is a capacity expansion in the second period. And then what you can see is actually, if you compare again these lines here, then you can see this goes up. And this sort of, while the QI2, this goes down. So what you can see, if you have a capacity expansion, but demand sort of remains stable, right? In this situation, basically the new entrant benefits a lot from this capacity expansion, while the incumbent airline would not benefit from the capacity expansion, would actually be reducing the number of passengers, because there is so intense competition now with this new entrant airline who has a lot of capacity available. And now we have another scenario where we look at growth, right? We keep the capacity the same over time, but we say, okay, now the dashed lines, they illustrate scenario, they stand for a scenario: solid line, low demand; dashed line, high demand. And then you can see what's happening again if you compare these lines, that now if the demand grows, and then actually but capacity remains the same, then new entrant actually will be worse off. So if you keep the capacity the same and demand is just growing, then the sort of incumbent airline has an incentive to sort of use this system in order to reduce the market shares of the new entrant airline in the future. So in this situation, usually we think that demand growth is something that should encourage, that should be something good for new entrants. But if you have a use it or lose it system, and if the capacity is given for a period of time, because maybe adding a runway takes quite a period of time, in this situation, this is not good news for new entrants and good news for incumbent airlines. Okay, so this is basically it. So because I'm also, as expected, running out of time, these are the results. So now what I try to explain to you is give you a rough idea about how all this model looks like. And these are the results. So if incumbents, if you need some, when it comes to the determination of use it or lose it shares, this should depend on, for instance, whether you have capacity growth, whether you have demand growth, whether maybe the rivalry between airlines becomes more intense or not. All these factors determine the optimal use it or lose it share. And depending on how the situation looks like at the different airports, then the use it or lose it shares should be different. It's important to have someone involved that would be protecting the passenger interests. So so the current system can work to the sort of well for the incumbent and the new entrants in a situation where you have capacity expansion and also demand growth. And yeah, so I will stop here. Just, there is a lot of literature, and I didn't mention any of you here, but I do try to have a fair discussion of the literature, definitely in the paper. And there are a lot of papers like Amadeo Odoni. He mentioned that I'm not sure whether he's here, but he registered. So definitely has worked a lot on airport slot allocation systems. A lot of our colleagues have been working on this. So it's a hot topic, and I really look forward to the discussion with you right now. I will stop this, and yeah, I would be maybe Vladimir, if you would just like unmute your mic and then ask your question.
Yeah, so first of all, Achim, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for organizing this. It's actually a really nice thing to have at this this particular time when we are confined to our homes in one way or another. And so essentially, I see that your model is looking at kind of more of a dynamics of airport demand and capacity. And what I was trying to get at is whether or not we should be thinking in terms of the optimal shares of optimal kind of use it or lose it shares as a function of the capacity of airport capacity that is actually being used, right?
I think what you're saying, are you talking about congestion so that we get the level, optimal level of congestion?
Yeah, exactly, yes.
Yeah. So that's something that is actually, this is, I feel maybe someone may be feeling uncomfortable with this. But in this model, actually, there's no congestion. Mm-hmm. There is no congestion. It's just that there's a certain capacity, and you can use this capacity, and until you reach the capacity, there is no congestion. But once you reach the capacity, then the congestion will be there. It's like an L-shaped function of form. So in order to keep it simple, because if you add congestion, okay, I haven't done the analysis, but my feeling is that everything will get much more complicated, but the qualitative results will not change very much. But I don't know. I have been, I have always been there. There are many situations where I thought like this. That something would not be very interesting to look at. And then I got very excited because I found out, yes, actually that makes a big difference and it's very interesting. But in this paper, I just intentionally sort of kind of didn't consider this because I considered the K just as given. And I also considered some change in K, but also the change in the capacity was sort of exogenous and not based on some sort of congestion considerations, which of course, this is very important. But I do believe for the dynamics and the incentives, maybe not so important. Kun, you also thank you very much, Volodymyr, for this question, which is definitely a very important issue, and I would like to address this in the future. Yeah, by adding congestion. Kun, you also had a question.
Yes, this is very interesting. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. I have one question regarding the demand uncertainty. So according to my understanding, the trade-off of the incumbent, there are two trade-offs. The first is to deter the entrant in the second period. And the second trade-off is to accommodate the demand increase in the second period. So by actually not getting the optimal profit in the first period. So My question is the growth is assumed to be certain in this model, right? So you have the background about the coronavirus. So so in this case, whether the demand increase uncertainty can play a role, I mean, to have some impact on the conclusions.
Yeah, that's right.
So that is
So
my
this is
question.
another, yeah, this is another excellent question. And you're actually, this is how you know, as you know, maybe I do have some studies where I consider demand as uncertain. So I'm sort of inclined to think about, you know, okay, demand can be high with certain probability, demand can be low with certain probability, and then how does this change the results? And when I started with, and this is, I think, how, if I remember correctly, actually, this study started quite a couple of years ago. I started with this. I started with a framework where the demand was uncertain. But then I recognized that actually it just adds a lot of, makes everything much more complicated, but it sort of is blurring the, you know, it's not very much to the point. It's not needed if you want to have this, you know, what I want is, okay, so the sort of the airline in the first period, what can they do? So they can adjust their supply in order to capture, in order to sort of anticipate the future competition with the new entrant. So that's something I wanted to capture. And then also, okay, so how would the incentives of an institution that basically represents the incumbent and not so much maybe new entrants, how would that perhaps distort incentives? And in order to show this, demand uncertainty was just not needed. So I just took it away, because I felt it's actually distracting. You know, very often it's like if you have this MTR map, you want to go by MTR and you add the roads. So who needs the roads? You want to take the MTR, so you don't need it. They give you the bicycle lanes and so on and so forth, but you're not using the bicycle. So why do you need it? So I just took it away. I just try to keep really relevant parts and try to focus on the analysis of these crucial parts. And to my understanding, demand uncertainty was not what I needed in order to show the incentives, the discrepancies between the incentives, and how usage share rules will be affecting the interaction between incumbent and new entrant airlines. I do believe it's not that I'm saying that uncertainty is not important or shouldn't be considered. But for what I wanted to achieve with this paper, I felt that demand uncertainty was not needed, and that it better taken away because it sort of was a little bit distracting. I consider it distracting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, we are now 3 minutes over time, but I have time, so you know we can. Whenever if you have a question, we're still. Thank you very much. Actually, there are a lot of few participants having a long breath and are still here. So thank you very much for staying for such a long time. Any other comment or? Can I ask you a question, or maybe I ask you a question? So, do you think is it impossible in the sense of transaction operations to implement use it or lose it on a case-by-case basis? So what I'm asking this as impossible, but of course it's sort of gradually. Do you think, because that was something that, of course, it makes the system more complicated, but I do believe this. We know that the use it or lose it policies are very important for the overall performance of the aviation industry. And we know that airlines, airports, they're also very flexible in terms of operations. They can handle very complex environments. So is it asked too much to sort of try to implement something that would be, have some decision making for airport use it or lose it shares on a case-by-case basis? It's a difficult question, so maybe not everyone has an opinion on that, and I understand. But I just think it's interesting to get to know to understand what you think about this.
Can you hear me, Achim?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, please. Here are the responses. Okay, here are the responses. So a lot of you say it's impossible, but then quite a few also think that it should be possible. So Nicole, please go ahead.
So what I would say is the reason why not everybody wanted to get rid of the slot control system in the first place is for purposes of stability, that the aviation system is under great pressure and that all scheduled transport modes have substantial difficulties. And removing that slot system would introduce much uncertainty into the story. If you, on the other hand, went along making some slots this way and some slots that, what you're doing is opening the door to a lot of discriminatory and potentially political restrictions on this story that you really want to avoid. You want to keep it as clean and as simple as possible, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's also something first of all, yeah, this stability issue, I think that's something where, as Kun mentioned, maybe if you want to add the demand uncertainty, and then maybe you can also see how different systems work in terms of stability. But this is I do not belong to a group of sort of economists who would be flat out saying, no, I don't like the system at all, and it's not like this. Yeah, so I do. So definitely, when I discussed, it's not about removing this system, right? As I mentioned, it's more like a sort of, the idea is to sort of fine tune it, yeah, and opening, asking for sort of government control, as you mentioned. Yeah, some government may be doing a good job, other governments may not be doing such a good job. I see that, and therefore this is sort of an open discussion. But I feel, yeah, I do believe that. But also, passengers, if you want to, you're having something scarce, you're having a scarce good. So thinking about how can you improve the system and perhaps allocating the system in a way that doesn't remove it, but just fine tunes it. I think that's it. Obviously I was thinking it. I thought it's worthwhile thinking about that. But I wouldn't say we should do this tomorrow and without further thinking and without further analysis. I totally agree with your assessment, and that it's something critical. It has been established for a long time. But on the other hand, we also see that sometimes systems can change quite dramatically, and also then perhaps to the good. So just again, it's just a discussion, and I try to sort of enrich the discussion with this study. Some other comments? But quite a few of you that think that is it impossible? No, that it could be possible to have something a little bit more flexible. Any other question? Okay, so if not, so I'm really grateful for everyone who has attended this session, and I do hope, actually I very much look forward to the coming the next three presentations by Nicole, who has just asked this question on air traffic control, and then also congestion, which is something that somehow surprisingly I didn't consider in this presentation. And then we have yours, who is a very extremely experienced econometrician. They do some, well, I do some more theoretical study. Jos is providing an empirical study on frequent flyer programs. And Jan Bruckner is presenting a study on airline scheduling that is theoretical as well as empirical. So I hope very much that you would also join these presentations. So thank you very much for participating, for your patience. Please stay healthy, and look forward to see you online and hopefully soon also in person. So I will stop the recording here and leave the session. Okay, so thank you again very much, and see you. Bye-bye.